What is good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode brought to you by the League FFB. With the NFL draft less than a week away, I wanted to make a video for you guys talking about the value of your 2024 rookie picks. Because those rookie drafts are going to be on the horizon, there is a chance that you may get some offers or you may be exploring some trades for those picks if you are not wanting to make those selections. So with that being said, we are going to be doing this in a two-part series. Today's video is going to be part one. Obviously, part two will be on Monday. We will discuss the 101 through the 106 today, and then we will discuss the 107 through the 112 on Monday. So without wasting any more time, why don't we just hop into today's video and let's start talking about some Dynasty trades. So the first and the most important thing that we need to talk about is the context. I have pulled all of these trades from Dynasty Daddy. If you guys have not used Dynasty Daddy, it's a great resource to use, a free resource that you can use for your Dynasty Fantasy Football teams. I will link them in the description down below. But I have pulled trades using the parameters of 12 teams, Superflex, Tight End Premium, PPR. All of those leagues are going to be start 10. And every trade that you're going to see in this video today has been made in the last week. So all of these have been completed within the last 7 days, giving you the most recent information for trades that have went through in actual Dynasty Fantasy Football leagues. So let's start off with the 101. Obviously, in your Superflex leagues, that 101 is most likely going to be Caleb Williams. I think he should be penciled in as the #1 pick in your Superflex drafts. The first trade that I want to bring up is this trade here on the screen. Justin Herbert and the 203 is received for the 101 and the 112. So you are trading Caleb Williams for Justin Herbert. You are getting that quarterback of the future. You move back a couple slots from that 112 to the 203. To be honest, that might still be the same tier of player. So even though you move back around, I don't know if you're actually losing that much value in a quality of a player that you are going to be receiving. But Justin Herbert for the 101, if you don't want to gamble on the rookie, you want a sure thing in Justin Herbert. We know Justin Herbert is a good NFL quarterback. Obviously, some question marks with Justin Herbert moving forward, but I still think that there's a chance that the Chargers end up getting a Marvin Harrison Jr. or a Malik Nabers in the NFL draft. And if they do, I promise you his value will go right back up to where it was. This is a first-round startup pick. Caleb Williams obviously is going to be flirting with that as well come draft time later this fall. But if you don't want to gamble on the rookie, you can get a sure thing in Justin Herbert. So let's move on to the second trade here. The second trade is going to be Patrick Mahomes for Javonte Williams in the 101. Obviously, the general topic of this video is rather than risking the rookie, if you were looking to explore trades, not that picking in this first round is going to be bad for your Dynasty Fantasy Football teams, but if you did look to explore, you want those sure things. Patrick Mahomes is as sure as it gets. This is as good of a quarterback as you could possibly ask for. I think anytime you can trade a gamble like Caleb Williams for a Patrick Mahomes type of player who is going to be good for a decade for your Dynasty Fantasy Football teams, the only thing extra you have to throw in is a Javonte Williams, who you can easily find a replacement for Javonte moving forward. That is a smash accept in my opinion. Now our third trade for the 101. You see it here. It is going to be the 101 and Cole Kmet. They are sent for Kyler Murray, a 2025 round 1 pick and a 2025 round 3 pick. So this one's interesting to me as well, because if you have the 101, the chance of you possibly being a rebuilding roster, maybe not ready to compete, is probably pretty high because you do have that first overall pick. You were probably one of the worst teams in your league last year, unless you have traded for it and it was somebody else. But the majority of the people who hold the #1 are going to be teams that did not perform in 2023. So if that was the case, I think this type of deal is a very good deal for a rebuilding roster. You get a quarterback like Kyler Murray. Obviously, he is still going to be very good for your fantasy football teams. There is very little risk in Kyler Murray because we know what he can produce for your fantasy football rosters as far as fantasy points go. He is one of the top quarterbacks in the NFL for fantasy football purposes. And not only are you getting a great asset like Kyler Murray, who does have a high ceiling, a high floor, you also get a future first-round pick in 2025 to continue adding young assets to your rebuild. I think this trade makes a ton of sense, and if you can get something done like this in a rebuilding situation, definitely something I would be willing to explore. And then the last trade here for the 101, you see it, Justin Jefferson and the 202 traded for the 101 and the 112. Now I put this in here because what if you already have your quarterback situated, and at that 101 you're looking at possibly drafting a Marvin Harrison Jr. Would you rather have Marvin Harrison Jr., who we expect to be a very good NFL wide receiver, or would you rather have the best wide receiver in football? Justin Jefferson, elite by all means necessary, and just like that Justin Herbert trade we looked at, yes, you trade back a couple of picks, but it's still probably within the same tier of players. Instead of Marvin Harrison, you are getting Justin Jefferson. This is a smash except from that side as well. And this is an example of some of the trades that you could explore for that 101. But with the 101 trades done, let's move on to the 102. And with that 102, I think most people have penciled in Marvin Harrison Jr. And I don't think that that is wrong. In my opinion, it is Caleb Williams and then Marvin Harrison Jr., number 1 and number 2. So most likely with those picks, you are going to be looking at taking that wide receiver. There probably is a chance that you look at quarterback, but let's look at some trades that have happened. The first one being Amon-Ra St. Brown for the 102 and a 2026 second round pick. So just like we talked about with that Justin Jefferson trade, you can sit there and you can take the gamble on Marvin Harrison Jr., who, as good of a prospect as he is, we also know that there is also a small risk with every single prospect that you draft. Those prospects could be a bust. There are crazier things that have happened. Yes, Marvin Harrison Jr., we expect him to be good, but there's always the probability of it not panning out. You can take Amon-Ra St. Brown, who we know is a difference maker, a hammer wide receiver for your Dynasty Fantasy Football rosters, and you can trade that 102 away for him. If you're not a gambling kind of guy, this is the type of trade that you can make to hedge those bets and make sure you are still getting a superstar for that 102 type of draft capital. Now we move on to the next trade here. Similar type of situation. You give up the 102 and Josh Palmer. Josh Palmer just a throw-in. We don't care about it. It gets us Ja'Marr Chase. Ja'Marr Chase, currently the wide receiver 2 in my Dynasty rankings. Even if Marvin Harrison Jr. hits his ceiling, I think that's a guy who at the end of the year is probably going to be my wide receiver 4, maybe my wide receiver 5. You go ahead and get the wide receiver 2 in Ja'Marr Chase. Still a young asset, nothing to worry about as far as age goes, tied to a great quarterback long-term, and Joe Burrow probably going to get a massive extension. I understand the hype of Marvin Harrison Jr., and yes, everybody is excited to draft him, but you get a guy like Ja'Marr Chase, I think it makes a lot of sense for your Dynasty Fantasy Football rosters. Let's look at one more trade here. You have DK Metcalf and the 102 being traded for Joe Burrow. So kind of similar to what we talked about with that 101. Yes, we expect it to be Caleb Williams, but maybe your league is crazy. Somebody goes Marvin Harrison with the 101. You're sitting there at the 102 and you have the chance to pick Caleb Williams. Well, what if you could trade the 102 for Joe Burrow? It's up to you in your league to kind of weigh how you want to view that one. Joe Burrow or Caleb Williams. We obviously know how good Joe Burrow has been, but then it gets into the conversation of a proven asset versus a high-end prospect. There's always the risk. Joe Burrow, another asset that you could trade that 102 for, and something worth exploring in your Dynasty league. So let's move on to the 103. And I think at the 103 is where it gets interesting in your rookie drafts because Caleb Williams, Marvin Harrison Jr., they are likely off of the board. And I think it puts it into that tier where people are going to be deciding between Jayden Daniels, Drake Maye, Malik Nabers, Odunze. Depending on the landing spots, those are going to be the groups of guys that I think people are going to be picking between. So again, we're kind of looking at wide receivers and quarterbacks as the value in this rookie class. So here at the 103, you see this one. This one's as simple as it gets. The 103 straight up for Justin Herbert. I would much rather gamble on Justin Herbert getting a better offense than gamble on Jayden Daniels or Drake Maye at that quarterback position. I think Justin Herbert, we've seen it. I don't have to talk too much about Justin Herbert. This is a very good trade if you have somebody in your league panicked on the situation of Justin Herbert. And like I mentioned earlier, I think there's a great chance that in this draft, they do add a wide receiver. Justin Herbert for the 103, that's a no-brainer for me. So let's look at a different quarterback, though. You have this trade on the screen, Kyler Murray and T. Higgins being traded for the 103 and the 107. And I get it. This isn't necessarily a trade that most people are going to be making because having multiple first-round picks is not usually likely in your leagues, but I think this is a good trade as well. I wanted to throw it in there. You get Kyler Murray and T. Higgins. It costs you that 103 and that 107. Let's put some names to it. Kyler Murray and T. Higgins for Jayden Daniels and Brock Bowers, or Jayden Daniels and Rome Odunze. That's kind of what this deal is. Yes, the name value of the rookies is exciting. It's hype. It's what we want. Kyler Murray and T. Higgins, they get it done. I think that these guys are young assets that you can still build a team around. Yes, T. Higgins is probably the wide receiver 2 on his team, and a Rome Odunze would probably be the wide receiver 1 on his team. But still, we don't know that today. This is another good example of a trade you could make with that 103. Then I have another one for you. You got this one on the screen, the 103, a 2025 round 1, and the 211. So that is what you are sending away. You get Justin Jefferson. I mean, we don't have to talk too much about it. It's Malik Nabers, a late second. The hit rates on those late seconds is very, very low. A 2025 round 1. I would throw all of those together to get a hammer like Justin Jefferson in my leagues at any point. This is a no-brainer for me as well. And if you're exploring that 103 trade, getting a guy like Justin Jefferson is a Hail Mary, and it is definitely worth every penny that you are going to spend. You probably would be willing to spend more than what you're giving up in a trade like this to go get Justin Jefferson. All right, now moving on to the 104, I found 3 trades that are very simple, very easy that have happened in these leagues. Let's start it off with this one. The 104 being traded for A.J. Brown. We talked about the wide receivers in this tier potentially being a Malik Nabers or a Rome Odunze. If you're trading one of those guys for A.J. Brown, we know that AJ has been dominant for fantasy football rosters. We know he is the number one wide receiver for the Philadelphia Eagles. We know he is an asset that has been a league winner for you down the stretch in Dynasty Fantasy Football Championships. Yes, that is what we hope Malik Nabers and what we hope Rome Odunze can become. But AJ Brown is the real deal. If you can maybe make a move like this, you don't want to risk on the rookie, maybe this is a trade that you make as well. But let's look at the other position because we talked about Drake Maye and Jayden Daniels also being possible scenarios for that rookie pick. Here's a trade right here. Trevor Lawrence for the 104. If you can move that 104 and get a guy like Trevor Lawrence, he was the former number one overall pick, a guy that people compared to Peyton Manning. And although I think a lot of people are down on Trevor Lawrence right now and are a little bit lower on him than they probably should be, Trevor Lawrence is a guy who is going to get a major extension to stay in Jacksonville. That's just something that's going to happen. And you could risk and you could gamble on the Drake Maye or the Jayden Daniels type of player, or you could take what you got in Trevor Lawrence. I think there's an argument for either side in this type of situation, but if you want to get out of the risk, we know that Trevor Lawrence is capable of putting up at least low-end quarterback one numbers for your rosters. And there's always the possibility that Jayden Daniels or Drake Maye turn into a Zach Wilson, turn into a Trey Lance, turn into one of those assets that never pan out. I think this hedges those bets as well. And even though Trevor Lawrence isn't probably the sexiest of assets that you want, probably not the most exciting thing to trade for, there is some value in getting a guy like Trevor Lawrence on your rosters. And then let's look one more. We talked about those wide receivers. Here's another example. Garrett Wilson for the 104. Garrett Wilson, a young guy, a guy that I believe in a lot, but obviously he hasn't had the quarterback play in his NFL career. This one's a little bit more of a gamble because I think there's a closer conversation between Garrett Wilson and a guy like Malik Nabers or a guy like Rome Odunze, depending on the landing spot that they get. But if you don't like the landing spots, maybe that happens on Thursday night and you say, hey, I don't like where Rome Odunze went. I'd rather roll the dice on Garrett Wilson. This is also a trade that you could make in your Dynasty Fantasy Football leagues as well. So now that we have those trades for the 104 out of the way, let's move on to the 105. This was an interesting pick because over the last week, there hasn't been a lot of straight across trades. So there's a couple package trades here. Again, we're in that same tier. I don't want to keep repeating it, but Jayden Daniels, Drake Maye potentially being the quarterbacks. I think at this point, you're more likely just looking at Drake Maye. Let's talk about this first one. The Lamar Jackson being traded for Deontay Johnson, Christian Kirk, Derek Carr, and potentially a Drake Maye or a Rome Odunze type player. You get Lamar Jackson. He is a hammer at that quarterback position. Again, a guy who has been dominant, multiple MVPs. He's been great for your fantasy football roster, scores a lot of fantasy points. You give up this package here where you give up the rookie, Christian Kirk, who is going to be a wide receiver 2/flex play for your rosters. Deontay Johnson, probably the same type of deal. And Derek Carr, a mid to low end QB2 for your roster. There's a lot more pieces in this one, and I feel like it could get a little bit scary when you think about giving up all of those pieces. But the best player in the deal by far is Lamar Jackson. Maybe this is something you could kind of work up or cook up on your end in your Dynasty leagues, depending on who has the asset like Lamar. You could package something together and go get a high-end quarterback like this. Let's move on to the next one. Jaylen Waddle and Keenan Allen being traded for the 105. So I think I would almost be willing to have a conversation of Jaylen Waddle for the 105 straight across. Obviously, like we've mentioned, Rome Odunze or Jaylen Waddle, you have to make that depiction. I think it's going to come down to landing spot, and maybe that's what is going to be the deciding factor for you on whether you trade them. You get Keenan Allen thrown in as well. Yes, he's a little bit older, but he should give you wide receiver 2 numbers at worst this year, I think, assuming that he stays healthy for the majority of the season. Jaylen Waddle and Keenan Allen, these are two assets that one is a young asset you can continue to build around. The other is an asset that's going to help you win some more fantasy football games this year. I think this is a good trade for the 105 as well if you're looking to move out of it. And then one more. You got Puka Nacua here on the screen for the 105 and the 201. Most people are going to have a first and a second round pick. If you can throw those together, the 105 and your 205 or the 105 and your 201 or whatever it may be, you get a guy like Puka Nacua. Even though I think Puka Nacua's value is kind of at its ceiling right now, I don't necessarily feel like Puka Nacua is going to step into that top 4, top 5 type of tier for Dynasty Fantasy Football leagues. And sorry if that offends you if you are a Puka Nacua fan, but I think where he's at right now makes a lot of sense. And although I said I think he is capped in value, it's hard to argue the production that Puka Nacua gives you. You get that type of production again out of him here in 2024, and it costs you that 105. I think there's a very high chance that Puka Nacua outscores a Rome Odunze this year, and that's the gamble that you're making with this type of pick. It's also no surprise that Puka Nacua is young. Obviously, what he was able to do in his rookie season last year is incredible. We don't got to talk about Puka, but here's another example of a trade that you could make for that 105. So that is going to take us to our last pick that we are going to discuss today. That is the 106. Keep in mind that 107 through the 112 will be coming out on Monday, so keep an eye out for that. But with this 106, let's assume at this point, Caleb Williams, Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Nabers, and Jayden Daniels are all gone. They are off the board. They came off in the first 5 picks. So let's assume that we are potentially picking between a Drake Maye, a Odunze, and a Brock Bowers. That is kind of the tier that we are in right here. So the first trade that I have for you, this is a bigger package than we've seen in some of these trades before, but you get the 106 in a package with Baker Mayfield, the 201, and the 204. It is being traded away. You get Jordan Love, DK Metcalf, and Isaiah Pacheco. And this is a little bit of a bigger trade, so I think some people get a little bit more scared when you see multiple assets being thrown around. But let's talk about it from a production standpoint. If you had the 106, let's say it's Drake Maye, and you want to move on to Jordan Love, I think most people would prefer Jordan Love to Drake Maye at this point. He is probably more valuable of an asset. So yes, you throw in Baker Mayfield, the 204, the 201, you get Isaiah Pacheco and DK Metcalf. I think those assets are all assets that can still stay young enough that you are going to be able to build around them for a few years. You also are going to be able to produce fantasy points immediately. We know how good Jordan Love, Metcalf, and Pacheco have been for Dynasty Fantasy Football. You're giving up a lot of risk on that other side. A lot of gambles in those picks. Baker Mayfield obviously had a good breakout year, but Baker Mayfield is what Baker Mayfield is. He is probably a high-end quarterback 2 for your rosters at this point. So this is a very interesting type of deal that could happen for that 106, something that you could kind of package a couple things together and maybe go get a Jordan Love or a something like that in a trade market. But this is an interesting trade to look at. Let's move on to the next one. You got Zamir White and Trevor Lawrence being acquired for the 106 and the 203. Similar type of deal. You get T-Law, you give up the 106, you get Zamir White, you give up the 203. There is a lot of risk being eliminated in those picks. And yes, Zamir White is probably risky as well. He is not the reason why you make this deal. Trevor Lawrence is the reason why you make this deal. Another good example of what you could possibly get for that rookie pick. And now let's do 2 more because we haven't talked a lot about Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers, obviously a very highly talked about tight end prospect. The 106 is possibly the first place that you would be looking to draft Brock Bowers, especially if you were in a tight end premium league like this one. I think this deal right here, the 106 for Trey McBride, this is a good conversation because Trey McBride right now in conversation for the tight end 2 or the tight end 3 in Dynasty Fantasy Football right there with Brock Bowers. Would you rather risk Brock Bowers or see where he goes? Maybe you don't like the landing spot and now you get to trade that 106 and get Trey McBride. I think that's an interesting conversation to have. And in a similar type of idea, this deal right here, Dalton Kincaid being acquired for the 106, same type of deal. It's the same type of idea. You get a guy in Dalton Kincaid who lost Stephon Diggs, who lost Gabe Davis. He's the #1 receiving option, and yes, they're going to be drafting a wide receiver as well, most likely. But you give up that 106 in Brock Bowers, you get Dalton Kincaid, same type of idea. You hedge your bet. You go get a proven young asset like Kincaid. I think both of these are great deals to make in case of a bad landing spot for Brock Bowers. Now, that is all I have for you guys today. If you did enjoy the video, go ahead and hit that like button. It is the best free way to show this channel some support, and hopefully you found this video informative, also actionable, so you could probably be exploring some potential trades if you don't like some of the landing spots that we get here later this week. But with that being said, make sure you guys are subscribed to this channel. That way you guys get notified when part 2 comes out on Monday. Also, we got a lot of great content on this channel, so go ahead and check out some more of it if you have some time today after this video. And last but not least, make sure you guys go join the Discord. We do have a free Discord linked in the description. We are in there talking about Dynasty Fantasy Football teams, trades. I am taking trades for trade review shows that we do on this channel. We will also be doing some rookie mocks here after the NFL draft. So I am going to be going to the Discord to get people for those things. Make sure you are a member of the Discord if you want to participate in future videos with me. And with all of those things being said, I will see you guys on our next video. But until then, peace out.